The skull is composed of multiple bones that are tightly joined together. The ligaments that hold these bones together are called sutures, and they eventually create immovable joints between each of the bones in adults. The cranium is the large, hollow, rounded part of the skull. Its cavity is termed the cranial cavity, which encloses the brain. The cavity has an upper section known as the vault of the skull, which is smooth on its outer surface, and the inner surface is marked by ridges and depressions to accommodate the brain and its blood vessels. The lower section of the cavity is known as the base of the skull. The cranium is formed by 8 flattened bones, which include 1 frontal, 2 parietal, 1 occipital, 2 temporal, 1 sphenoid, and 1 ethmoid bone. The frontal bone is a bone of the skull found in the forehead region. 1 parietal bone is located on each side of the skull, just behind the frontal bone. Together, the parietal bones form the walls and the roof of the cranium. The temporal bone is one of 2 bones that form parts of the sides and base of the cranium. On this bone, you should be able to identify the external auditory meatus, which leads inward to the ear, and also the mandibular fossa. Below each external auditory meatus, there is a large rounded process called the mastoid process. The mastoid process provides an attachment for certain muscles of the neck. The occipital bone forms the back of the skull and the base of the cranium. There is a large opening on the lower surface called the foramen magnum, through which nerve fibres from the brain pass and enter the vertebral canal to become part of the spinal cord. Rounded processes, called occipital condyles, which are located on each side of the foramen magnum, unite with the first vertebra of the spinal column. The external occipital protuberance is a bump on the occipital bone's external surface. It is the site where muscles such as the trapezius and muscles of the head and neck attach. Also attached to this area is the ligamentum nuchae, a thick fibrous band that aids in the ability of the body to hold the weight of the head upright. The sphenoid bone is wedged between several other bones in the front of the cranium. It consists of a central part and 2 wing-like structures that extend sideways toward each side of the skull. This bone helps form the base of the cranium, the sides of the skull, and the floors and sides of the orbits, or eye sockets. The ethmoid bone, here in grey, is located in front of the sphenoid bone. It consists of 2 masses, one on either side of the nasal cavity, which is joined horizontally by thin cribriform plates. Parts of the ethmoid bone form sections of the cranial floor, eye sockets, and nasal cavity walls. The bones of the cranium are perforated by many holes known as foramen or foramina for the passage of nerves and blood vessels. For example, the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone forms the roof of the nasal cavity. It is pierced with small holes termed olfactory foramina, and through the perforations run many branches of the olfactory nerve into the mucous membrane of the nose, enabling the sense of smell. There are 14 facial bones in total, all except the mandible being united by sutures that are removable. The bones that you are required to familiarise yourself with are the 2 nasal bones, here in blue, we can see, and up on the exploded skull, we can see here. They form the bridge of the nose. These bones serve as attachments for the cartilaginous tissues that are mostly responsible for the shape of the nose. 2 lacrimal bones form the tear ducts and part of the orbit at the inner angle of the eye. You can see here in green, we have the lacrimal bone on the left. The lacrimal sulcus, which I have my probe in, leads from the orbit to the nasal cavity and provides a pathway for a tube that carries tears. Have you ever tasted eye drops? We then have two zygomatic bones that form the cheekbones. Here we can see in pale blue, and on the exploded skull we can see the left zygomatic bone. Processes from these bones unite with the zygomatic processes of the temporal bones to form a zygomatic arch. Two maxilla form the upper jaw, 1, 2, and contain the upper teeth. The mandible forms the lower jaw and is one of the only movable bones in the skull. It contains the lower teeth and forms the chin. The mandibular condyles, which I have my probe on, form the temporomandibular joints with the temporal bones mandibular fosses.